are excited to have our next guest today, Jordan Friesen. Jordan is one of those that gets in workplace mental health, and he is also the founder of Mindset Mental Health Strategy. Jordan's also been on the front lines of employee well-being for years, from leading national mental health initiatives in Canada's nonprofit world to now helping companies build healthier, more supportive workplaces. And I'm reading this shamelessly because this is so cool. Jordan, welcome to the show, and thank you for making some time for us.
Hey, Maurice, thanks for having me. It's absolutely a pleasure.
We are talking a lot about the different things that are happening, not only in our own lives and our own journeys, but with your company. I'm wondering if you can just give us a little bit about your background and how everything developed here and what you're doing as far as making a mentally healthy workplace.
Yeah, sure, Maurice. I'll give you the Coles notes. The story is long and winding, but we'll take the shortcut today. Back in the day, and this is when I first started post-secondary education, which feels like an eternity ago by now, I was always academically inclined, math, science, physics, chemistry, you name it. And so what really appealed to me was engineering. I loved the idea of solving complex problems. And so I actually studied aerospace engineering for quite a while, learning to shoot rockets into space and plot trajectories and all the fun stuff. I mean, it's mostly math, let's be honest. In the midst of that, and this kind of ties into why I do the work I do, I had my first experience of a major depressive episode. And I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, and something I found out actually runs in my entire family and something we'd never really talked about. I remember having this conversation with my mom on the way home from the doctor's office on campus. And I said, Mom, the doctor said I have depression. What is that? And she said, wow, Jordan, I'm so sorry. We've never talked about this, but that was my experience after you were born. Your dad's dealt with that on and off throughout his life. Both of your grandfathers have had that experience, and your younger brother started saying some similar things just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. And so here was this experience that had touched my entire family that we'd never really talked about. And so I sort of from there made it kind of my mission to talk about it more. And also then figured, well, is there a way I can use some of this experience, to maybe make sure other people don't have to go through it. And so I found my way to mental health as a profession. I'm an occupational therapist by trade. And from there, I think took a real interest in workplaces because we spend so much time at work, and research shows it's got such a huge impact on our mental health. There are many other things too, we know, right? Genetics clearly has a role to play, as I know from my family, but it's also the skills and resources we have as people. It's also the environment around us. And when I think about the work environment, there's just such massive opportunity to make work a place of happiness and health and purpose and meaning. And it can serve as a huge buffer. I like to think that the ideal world, what I'm trying to do is make every workplace kind of that safe haven when the storm of life is kicking stuff up that makes it really hard to deal with. That's the ideal. That's the how I got to where I am. And I'll maybe just briefly, the what is really, I help leaders understand how and why they should be looking after the mental health of their people and take an environmental approach to it. So it's not about diagnosing. It's not about necessarily providing the right care or benefits or therapy. It's about making sure the work environment is set up to give people the best chance of being happy, healthy, and well at work.
Now, you bring up an important point on the environment, because if you think of the nomenclature, if that's that is in the corporate world, is it's such a toxic environment, this or that. What is your approach to making sure that we not only understand what environment is, but then also to diagnose those things in the environment that are chipping away at mental health?
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so like there's a lot of best practices already out there, and that's the cool thing. And up in Canada, I have the ability to say Canada is one of the pioneers in this. And so we actually developed a national standard for what we call psychological health and safety in the workplace. And so it's a voluntary safety standard at the moment, moving towards mandatory in some places in Canada. And we did that back in 2013. So there's been a conversation in Canada now for well over a decade. But essentially, the way to go about it is, maybe I'll share an anecdote or a story. And Maurice, I don't know, have you ever worked or been on a construction site?
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Okay. So, and if you've gone into a construction site, you know that the first thing you have to do when you get into that construction site, you get to the site, you got to sign it, but then you usually have to do what? What's the first thing from a
Well, they
safety
had me to
perspective?
put all the safety stuff on.
Exactly, right? So you got to put on the PPE, the personal protective equipment, the hard hat, the steel toe boots, the high vis, whatever it is, right? And we all agree, I think unanimously, that's a good thing to do. And that if an employer, a construction company didn't ask people to do that, that would be negligent and irresponsible. That's an easy thing to agree on.
Right.
But now, Maurice, I want you to imagine if you walked onto that construction site, picture it in your brain, whatever it was, and from a few stories up, at random intervals throughout the day, there would just be bricks falling down. Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe someone would be kicking them down. Who knows? Now, it doesn't matter how great that hard hat is or whether or not everyone's wearing them. Eventually, someone's going to get hurt. Okay. And so this is I think the common misstep that workplaces make is that they focus on the hard hats or the personal protective equipment for mental health. And so that is things like an employee assistance program, that's things like access to psychological care and all that stuff. And we can all agree that's good stuff to have, right? There's no question about it, because heaven forbid something happened to you at work or outside of work, you want to know that you've got some protection. But what employers don't often do is look up and try to figure out, where are these bricks falling from and who in the world keeps kicking or throwing them down? And when we put it in the construction context, it sounds ridiculous. Of course you would want to know where those bricks are coming from. But in other industries and in the psychological sense, not a lot of time and attention paid to those bricks. And so those bricks are things that we call psychological hazards, right? And that could be, if you think about the most toxic work culture you can imagine or remember, the bricks are easy to pick up on, right? They're poor communication, they're incivility or bullying, they're long, unreasonable hours or huge, unreasonable workload, they're leadership or teams that go behind your back or engage in gossip or discrimination. And there's other subtler ones too, right? Like not having a clear understanding of what your job is or what you're supposed to do, or even not necessarily having all the right skills to get done what you're being asked to do, right? Like those are all bricks. And so the key to creating a mentally healthy workplace, certainly make sure you got the hard hat set up, but then start talking to your people to try to understand, what are the bricks? Where are they coming from? And who might be kicking them?
This is great because it makes me think about some of the consulting projects that I've been on. And there's one big word that is almost everyone's guilty of time and time again. And that's the word assume. I assume that things are all right. I assume that person's a jerk. I assume without digging deep into that. And you challenge those assumptions and you quickly realize, well, I wish I would have known that.
Yeah. And the assumption that most business leaders are making, and I can pull the data from the US, survey data from the US and many other countries, is that business leaders assume that their workplace culture is healthier and more supportive of mental health than the average employee feels. So they make that massive assumption without fact checking it, without actually talking to the people that are working for them.
What I've also found is that then you have the culture surveys within the organization and everything is well above 70%, which they go, hey, that's acceptable.
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And then you quickly realize after you go individually, I remember in multiple organizations, I would go and I'd interview everybody.
Yep.
And then you quickly realize that you have that, what is that word I'm looking for? It's the test where people groupthink. It's they think, oh my goodness. And one person said, I better say this too, without really getting into the nitty gritty of it all. And understanding that that's a very real thing. I mean, there's something there in the 50s, they had candid camera and they showed the individual going in the elevator and everyone's facing the rear of the elevator and he's looking at everyone's weird. And then he slowly slipped back of the elevator. And we laugh at that, but it happens in organizations all the time.
It does.
It's part of that culture, and if you dig deeper, it's also a source of the duress that the employees are feeling. So what has been your experience in chipping away at that?
And so I'll tell you, it is a tough mountain to climb in a lot of organizations. But and my experience with it is that when people think like, how do we tackle mental health in the workplace, that like the easiest answer, kind of moving past even that hard hats analogy and the bricks, is try to figure out where is there unnecessary stress in the system and take it out. That's it, right? Like that's the question we're trying to answer. So often the best solutions or interventions are some of the simplest ones.
Mhm.
So it's things like giving somebody more control over an aspect of their job, for example, or inviting input on decisions before they're made, or communicating more frequently about changes as they're coming up within an organization. Now, these sound like really small things, and maybe they are, but to try to get an organization to operate differently than it's been doing for 15, 20, 50, or even 100 years is really challenging. And then the other piece of it, you mentioned surveys. And often I find that's a big way that data is what starts to move the needle for a lot of employers, especially larger employers. But the data that they're gathering, it's all self-serving, right? You get vendors, right, that create tools that are engagement surveys, and they know that the buyer, right, wants to see that positive result. And so, of course, all the data is skewed. And so what we often help employers do is get a more unbiased look at the state of their workforce. So we use evidence-based, validated, psychometrically sound tools that don't have that retail bias. And we use that to gather perspectives from employees. But then I often say the data might tell you the current state, but it's hearing from employees, it's the voices that will actually start to help you figure out what the solutions are. So we model kind of a consultative approach to workplace mental health with companies. We gather data, we paint a picture for them. We can even translate it into hard dollars and cents costs if they really want. And then we actually go to the employees and invite them to be a part of the process. It's your work, it's your job. You want it to be better, and your employer ideally does too, because that translates into a whole bunch of benefits for them.
Right.
So what are the practical, pragmatic solutions that day to day are actually going to take stress out of the system of work, make you a little less stressed when you leave at the end of the day and go do all the other aspects of your life? So that's generally the approach. I mean, there's lots of challenges still, always, right?
Yes. Well, and with those challenges, the other thing I found is even individuals. Individuals will come with pre-existing conditions. So, for instance, you were mentioning, if I may be so bold as to go,
please, yep.
You had that episode, and it was probably something brought on, but then it was something very familial. How then do you marry those two? That invention on something that's pre-existing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's a common question, right? It's like people are coming to work and they bring everything with them.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. All of their life stuff, all of the stresses from their family, all of their health conditions or disabilities, like all of that comes with them. And it's fair to say employers often feel pretty overwhelmed. It's like, okay, well, like now are we responsible for everyone that has depression and making sure that they don't feel depressed at work? And the answer is no, not completely. Right. So here's how employers can tackle those pre-existing conditions. Number one, what you have control over as an employer is the work environment that people work in. It's like the fish tank, right?
Yes.
So make sure that environment is not contributing to that pre-existing condition, not exacerbating that pre-existing condition. That's number one. Number two, not that you have to, but it's a good thing to do, and it's got lots of benefits, is making sure that those people with those health conditions have access to the care and support that they need to manage those conditions, either at work or outside of work, right? Like, well, probably outside of work. But then the third piece is for employers to create what I call a disclosure-friendly culture, or a culture of individualized work.
Yes.
So I'm Jordan, and I've got a major depressive disorder. And it's fair to say that there have been periods in my life where I've had relapses or I've had recurrences of depressive episodes while I've been working. Depressed people work too. Yeah. And so the key for employers is if I know I've got Jordans, and statistically speaking, you've probably got 10% of your workforce or more is Jordan's, right? What can I do to make it easier for Jordan to come forward and say, hey, look, this is what I'm experiencing. This is how it's affecting me at work. And for the foreseeable future, or for this period of time, this is the kind of change or adaptation I need to make sure that I can continue to stay at work and be productive for your company. And so to do that, you need to make sure that people understand their rights. You need to make sure they understand policies around accommodation. Now, I know that's different in the US than it probably is in Canada, but also they need to see examples of people in the organization that have made those kinds of disclosures and have continued to succeed. So one of my favorite clients is one of the big four up here in Canada. And what they actually just recently, well, they've been doing it for years, is they've been telling stories. So they're lucky enough to have a chief mental health officer. And this is and this is a retired partner, right? So someone who was one of the most successful enterprise partners at the firm in Canada, retired, but then came back into this role and began sharing his own story, coincidentally of depression as well, sharing his story and sharing it across the firm and talking about how it impacted his work and talking about what support the company gave him and how, hey, he was still able to be a partner and still able to do his job. And now what they've got is groundswell of other people across this firm telling their stories too. It could be partners, can be directors, can be new hires, and they engage in regular storytelling. And what it does is it sends the message really clearly across the firm that if you have a challenge like this, it's okay. And in fact, you can get help. We want to help you. We will make sure that you are set up for success. And when you do reach out for that support, you will still be successful here. And so that's the message that employers need to start creating. When we're talking about those pre-existing conditions, how do you manage it well? You manage it well by being able to bring it into the light. It generally gets managed quite poorly if you got a culture where people don't feel safe to share that with you, because then they try to hide it, they work around it. It comes across as quote unquote performance issues, and that leads to challenging situations and outcomes for everyone.
Yeah, it really does. If you were to give advice to, well, first of all, thank you for all that. And I've processed that, which leads to this question.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to an individual that is having a hard time with their organization? And this is, and let's say that it is not a current intervention you're with, but it's an individual and organization. It's maybe it's toxic. Maybe they're overworked. The stats are showing that it's in the upper 80s, a percentage of people feeling overwhelmed at work.
Mm-hmm.
What's a recourse that they can take in order to better it for themselves?
The recourse here is tough. And admittedly, right, employers hold so much of the power in these relationships. If you are someone that is experiencing a health-related disability of any kind, mental health-related disability of any kind, I think first and foremost is to know what your rights are. And so educate yourself. And I think then make the decision about whether or not that's a conversation you want to have with your employer. I'm not suggesting you should. I'm suggesting it's a very personal decision for everyone. There's pros and cons on all sides of that equation, but it's a very personal decision. And so make that decision. The other thing a couple more things I would suggest, but number one, I think, is also having a fairly candid conversation with your immediate manager or supervisor. And this is maybe something that requires a bit of, I'll call it bravery, but most managers, whether they will articulate or not, want their people to be happy and want their people to stay at work. Because if you leave, guess who's going to be picking up the slack for a little while, right? Like,
yeah,
clearly, right? So they have a vested interest in keeping you at work. And so having a very practical conversation with your manager, and not about venting or ranting or anything like that, but saying, look, this is how I'm feeling about work right now.
Yep.
And these are the kinds of things that I think would make a real difference if we could change them. Okay. And so a little bit of self-advocacy could, in fact, go quite a long way. And do your best to come with really practical suggestions, whether it's changing a process or changing a meeting time, or whether it's a point where you could benefit from some added flexibility, like whatever it is. And then do your best to sell it in sort of the what's in it for you, right? It means I'm going to be able to do this faster, get this done quicker, or whatever it might be. And then I would also say there are admittedly some environments where what needs to happen is a tone shift at the top. I think the other piece of it is that if you're not finding that the work environment is the right one for you, you need to make that personal decision of, is staying in this environment worth my mental health? And that's, again, it's a tough one. The labor market's not easy. I know that. But I know that there are a lot of really good employers out there. For every bad employer or for every bad manager, there's also a really good one somewhere. I know in the economy as it is, there's a lot of scarcity mindset going on. But I will say from my experience, like I've had the privilege of working with, man, nearly 100 really great employers that are trying to do their best for their people. And so there is greener grass somewhere as well. But I think it's you understanding what's that trade-off, right? What is your mental health worth? And if it's not worth what you're getting paid and the stress you're having to deal with, it might just be time for a change.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like that. And it was that sage advice because it takes them through the process of not making an immediate decision based on how
No,
the circumstance might be.
let's be real too. Like work is never going to be stress-free, right? No, never. So like we got to set realistic expectations. Work is never going to be stress-free, but I think it has to be a level of stress that you're willing to tolerate, a level of stress that you can cope with effectively. And then the hard hats, I suppose, would be like you as well, figuring out what are the ways I can cope with stress differently? Because a lot of us, we keep the same stress management, mental health tools in our toolbox for decades. Like I'll say like when I was first diagnosed with depression, right? The coping strategies in my toolbox were like primarily physical activity, friends and relationships, social engagement. Like those were things that actually helped me cope with what I was experiencing. But now as someone who's older, someone who has a kid and a family and a mortgage and a busy life, right? Like, man, some days I tell you, going to the gym just does not happen. It can't. So if I was relying on that as my only tool in my toolbox, it doesn't fit my life anymore. And so we do actually need to refresh those tools, right? Like every chisel eventually gets dull and our coping strategies get dull over the course of our life too. And so taking a critical look at how am I coping? Am I using the right tools? Are they actually helping me? And do they actually fit my life anymore? Because maybe they did 10 years ago, but they don't anymore.
Man, that's a great point. I've never heard it at that point. I mean, Cutby would say sharpen the saw. And
Sometimes you just need a different saw. Yeah. Like you can sharpen that saw all you want, but eventually maybe there's nothing left to sharpen. And heck, you don't need a saw anymore, right? Like you I don't know, you need a hammer, you need a chisel. I don't know what it is, right? You can take that analogy any way you want. But yeah, like we as humans, we get stuck in these ruts of, well, this is how I cope. This is how I cope because this is how I've always coped. But you change, life changes, your stress changes, your ability to deal with it changes. So your tools got to change too.
Oh my goodness. It reminds me of the movie I just watched the other day, The Intern with Robert De Niro, where he was executive of the White Pages.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Relevant. But wow. No, thank you for that. That was a great analogy. I've got to ask you for one more question. And that is, would you mind giving me an example of a before and after picture of someone that you have helped with their mental health strategy, mental well-being, and such within the organization?
Yeah, let me think about this here. A before and after. Yeah, so I could think of one company, and I'll change some of the details just so nobody can figure it out. But actually, it's a municipality here. It's a large city in Canada. And they came to me because they really cared about the mental health of their people. This was coming out of the COVID era. And I know the years we'd rather forget, right? Like 2 weeks to flatten the curve that turned into 2 years of lost everything. But the situation was that they were doing a lot of different things and they had a great network of champions and they were all advocating for mental health and they were doing lunch and learns and they were doing wellness days and they were doing benefits campaigns, all this kind of stuff. They're doing a lot, but people still didn't feel supported. You asked anybody and they still didn't feel well at work and they didn't necessarily feel that work was adding to their sort of well-being balance. And so what we did is we collected some more data. So we helped them collect some better data about their people and not just how stressed are you, but again, some of those questions around what are the bricks that are falling and as well as what are the things that you really value about work, where you find purpose and meaning and all that jazz. So we got some better data. We also added a little more structure to how they looked at mental health within the organization, right? Like we set up a equivalent of an ERG. We set up a steering committee, a lot of the back end stuff that's kind of boring, but you have to do to make it work. And then we help them refocus their efforts. So we help them focus on, number one, providing better, more frequent information about the supports that people had at work, right? Because their hard hats were there, but poorly used. People weren't putting them on. So we did that. And then shifting focus away from, instead of trying to do something like a wellness day across the company, what we did is then we actually got department by department. We actually tasked them as a department with figuring out what are the changes or what are the strategies or what are the tasks that are actually going to enhance wellness within this department. And so we actually had them develop department by department, individualized little action plans around, not like we're going to host a lunch and learn, or we're going to go take 10,000 steps, but we're going to structure our team meetings this way, or we're going to make sure that this is always on the agenda, or we're going to start using this communication method because that will make our lives easier and more effective and more efficient. And so from A to B, or start to finish, we took them from a place where they were trying to do everything blanket across the organization with very minimal impact to a place where they knew actually department by department what the specific needs or bricks were. And every single person in that department was involved in figuring out, how do we stop this brick from falling? So that's the transformation that we like to take people on, is from, the shotgun approach,
Right.
to something more targeted, more effective, and more efficient, because a lot of this stuff costs money.
Yeah.
It takes time, it's resource intensive. And so we want to make sure that what we're doing and where we're spending our time and money is actually making an impact in the workplace.
I love what you said about including everyone, because oftentimes I look at business initiatives and some of them, suffice to say, they have to be an executive order. And those are few and far between, but usually what the initiatives I've seen fail is because they didn't take an environmental scan from everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no buy-in, there's no nothing. And so this is no different from what you're doing from the mental health aspect.
No, it's really not. Like, we're taking a change management, organizational development approach to mental health in the workplace. And that's really what best practice is, more than lunch and learns and webinars and EAPs, right? Let's design work so that work itself is what keeps us well and healthy and happy.
I cannot thank you enough for sharing your insights. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I've certainly learned quite a bit. I mean, I'm still geeking out over that. Sometimes we don't need the saw, man. Let's sharpen into that bad boy. Let's get it out of there.
You can keep sharpening it until there's nothing left of it, Maurice. You can't do that.
Oh, but this is great, and thank you for the work you're doing.
No problem. Well, thank you for having me, and a warm and welcome hello from your friends in Canada. Looking forward to getting back to the US. I do, in fact, love the States. And so anyway, warm welcome and a hug from up north.